in other words, the judge is going to totally ignore the fact. I says, hey, she hasn't only accused me of sexual abuse, we're talking elderly sexual abuse, okay? This is total bullshit, and I've just documented this total bullshit, and, what the court should have done at that time is gone, Mrs. Moore, you're basically making almost criminal charges here that Mr. Brailer, and as a landlord, I mean, the consequences in a legal proceeding would be, a landlord, it's one thing for somebody to say, you want me to do some work for you and I want sexual favors. It's a whole other thing for a landlord to do that. He puts his whole property at risk. And obviously, Mr. Brailer has just presented impeaching evidence that's a complete lie. A complete lie. And not only that, I explained that the tenant who was talking about the dog used to like to show me off his big gun. He had this pistol, and he'd point it at me once in a while when I'd do something, and just like to show me his big gun. But he always, I'd have to always point to him that there weren't any bullets in it. But that was in regards to leaving a gate open. I left a gate open when I was working back there one time, or something of that order, and he got all excited. Anyway, both of the people she refers to didn't want me in their house. Most tenants do not want you in their house. They don't want you in there doing repairs all the time. Not like Mrs. Moore. She had me building things for her, hanging things for her, trying to basically build a dome over. She would have liked to have me build a dome over the place to keep her cat in, instead of just keeping her cat in herself. The judge totally ignores these. He goes, well, Mr. Brailer, you did not complete your contract. I says, hey, this is 350 jobs that she gave me to do that kept me from getting to the jacuzzi. Well, it doesn't matter, Mr. Brailer. And now, what's going on here is, what should go on in a court is, it's supposed to be her without an attorney, in a small claims, it's supposed to be her without an attorney, me without an attorney. But that's not what's happening here. Because she's hired this Mr. Curry, who's a friend of this court, who is related to this judge, what I've told him I think of judges. And believe me, I think a lot worse of judges than that. Basically, they're a bunch of attorneys with robes on. That's all they are. If they had any authority, it's been forfeit by this collusion and conspiracy between them to aid and abet the frauds of their kind, which is what this is. By the way, I start out my, when I go into court, Mrs. Moore's testimony, which Brailer will, this is what I give to the judge. Mr. Brailer Moore's testimony, which Brailer will show are inconsistent with Brailer's records, are highlighted in red. In other words, here's the transcript of her case, and I've highlighted that I produced from the recording, and I highlight in red. You see the red? Red, 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 throughout, red. Okay? In other words, I'm saying almost everything she is going to present to you, because what happens, she starts in, and I see right away, she's going word per word from her previous presentation where I wasn't there. I said, so here, Judge, here, you can take this in hand, and you can read, it sounds like she's going in order here. You can read line per line. These are all lies, which I am going to document. I am going to impeach, like I say, which my records show. Brailer will show Moore and her attorney could not have dared suborn so much fraud, especially in light of Brailer's written response to a previous extortion attempt, without absolute assurance from her attorney that Brailer would not appear to his intentional misaddressing service to Brailer. I, Brailer, will show that her attorney would not have dared were it not for his reliance upon what I will document using trial, appellate, federal, and higher appellate court records in the case of Nicholson versus Brailer and federally Brailer versus Nicholson et al., that judges for racketeering, showing that the San Diego Superior Trial, 4th District Court of Appeals, and the San Diego Federal Courts are engaged in a conspiracy and collusion to violate the constitutional rights of citizens, to prevent relevant impeaching evidence and conduct relevant impeaching testimony, and to obstruct or refuse appeals and thereby block redress for racketeering activities of attorneys, officers of the San Diego courts, under protection of what I term the San Diego and possibly national judicial racketeering enterprise. I am talking malfeasance and treasons by and for a domestic enemy of the public in violation of our Constitution, our conditional employment contract with them, rendering the judiciary incapable of providing oversight and consequence to the legislative and executive branches composed of attorneys raised under this impunity. In other words, I go right into court and I go, hey buddy, there's a conflict of interest. There's a conflict of interest for you to even hear this matter. Now, in the subsequent trials, next one I do a 6-pager, next one I do an 8-pager, reviewing my previous dealings with the trial of federal and federal court, appellate and federal courts. They totally disregard my impeachment. You know, I show. Oh, the stairs. The stairs are all wired together. You know, they're cinder blocks. There ain't no way, even if you step down the edge of these things are going to move or budge. They're cinder blocks. They're actually, you can see the wiring here. They're wired together. You know, I've got this construction wire wrapping these groups of. So you're talking these cinder blocks. You're talking this bullshit lies she tells. You're talking, and by the way, you know, what he's trying to get me on is the fact that I didn't notice her. Well, I didn't notice her because I wanted her to sue me. Because I wanted a fraud with which to further document the court's, you know, collusion in aiding and abetting frauds once an attorney's involved. And she had an attorney, so I knew that this is where exactly what would happen. Totally, you know, in other words, they're talking about, you know, I should have given her a written notice of what her damage deposit went for. The day she left, after she cleaned the carpets, after what she didn't know is I had videotaped them the day before, the damage was there. I explained it to her. And there was nothing that she could, you know, the idea is you're supposed to give them a written notice. The purpose of that law, which he apparently, according to them, if I didn't misunderstand it, actually wrote, was so that a tenant would have a right to be able to repair the damages, you know, it says reasonable time before they leave to repair the damage. Well, we're talking about damage that exists on the day she leaves. Yeah, she cleaned the carpet to cover it up, you know, but as soon as the carpet dried, those spots came right back up, right? And the smell, it took 30 days for the smell. I had to clean the carpet probably about 10 times on my hands and knees with bricks and got some movies of that too. What it is you go into a small claims court, it's supposed to be you and the other person, and neither of you are supposed to be represented by an attorney. Well, what happens is, just as in this case, if you have an outside advice from an attorney and you bring it to the court's attention, and if you don't, the attorney will certainly call up and let the judge know. What happens is they get the judge as their attorney. Now, what about your equal protection under the law? What about your right to? You don't have a right to representation if you go into a small claims court. What about the fact that she's getting representation and I'm not? Okay, she's getting the judge. In other words, he's not saying, okay, Mr. Mrs. Moore, what do you charge? Okay, Mr. Brailer, what do you say about that? Okay, Mrs. Moore, do you have a counter to that? Okay, Mr. Brailer, do you have a counter to that? No, he's making all the arguments for her. He's acting as her attorney. He's bringing up points she doesn't have the sense to bring up. And I am being attacked by an attorney, not only an attorney, but an attorney with a robe on. You know, like what I told this judge at this last hearing. I said, I'm going to show that all these things that you have listed here, these purported rights under Constitution, these reported rights under Constitution, I'm going to show they don't exist in this court, that this is all bullshit. That because of the criminal activity you, judge, are engaged in, they don't exist in this court, and my rights are being violated. So anyways, what is there else to say? Except, oh, yeah. Okay, so anyways, you know, here's the way the judges always do it. When they're going to bury you, when they're going to fuck you, what they do is they don't make their decision at the end of the thing because they know you're going to stand there and go, what the fuck are you talking about? And, you know, did you even hear me? You know? So what they go is they go, I'm going to take this under advisement and I'll send you my decision. Okay, that's what they always do.